Welcome to the next episode of Metawell, where we consider all things wellness and well-being. And if you've been listening chronologically, we spent the last couple of times talking about social well-being. And we're going to kind of grow out of that. We're still going to talk a little bit about social well-being, but we're going to also kind of transition into a bit of mental well-being. Hopefully that'll kind of orient you to where we're going. But we're going to spend a chunk of time talking about the World Happiness Report. And every year, a group from Oxford University, they're called the Wellbeing Research Institute. They do this research where they look at each country across the world and factors that contribute to people and therefore countries being happy. And they kind of boil down some factors that lead to happiness. There's a 2025 report that is out, and for the 8th consecutive year, Finland has topped the list of the happiest country in the world, followed by several other Nordic states. Maybe a little surprising, maybe not so surprising for some. The United States, where we are, has dropped in its rankings. Now the United States is ranked number 24th. So
not so surprising to me. But
so my first question, and we're going to talk about some of the factors that lead to happiness and how the countries are rated and all those kinds of things. But we're not so much going to focus on which countries are happy and which countries are not happy and all of this. We're really just going to focus on happiness and how happiness contributes to mental well-being. And so my first question for you, Cecil, is why might happiness be a good indicator of mental well-being?
well, I think that's the perfect way to frame it as an indicator, as this is a sign of where mental well-being is, rather than being 100% synonymous with it. But the reason that it is a good indicator of it is because when they measure happiness, life satisfaction, all these very closely related things, they're taking into account, like we are in this podcast, different components of what's going on in the lives that are being lived and how that contributes to how well they would say how good they would say they feel about those lives. And I think if you take mental well-being to be this summation of something like that, of am I feeling pretty good about where I'm at right now? Am I able to think clearly and have peace of mind and feel like I'm well balanced mentally? I think your life satisfaction overall is very much sewn into that. And so I don't think it's as simple as saying mental health is happiness, but it most certainly is a very important component to that.
Yeah, as you were talking to, I think one of the things that came to my mind is it's almost kind of like a chicken and an egg thing. Does happiness lead to well-being, or does well-being lead to happiness? And I think it's almost impossible to like pull those things apart. I think they just coexist. When happiness is present, well-being is also more likely to be present. I think happiness as well, especially when we put it into the context of mental well-being, it's not just an emotion, but it's mental stability. It's mental, I guess I would even go as far as like potentially like relaxation or calmness or right. So it's like I can say that I'm happy, that I'm flourishing when I'm not overly stressed, when I'm not too run down, when I'm not. So I feel like there's balance in what's happening here. And so I think again, it's not that happiness is the only indicator, but it is an indication of I feel settled, I feel mentally well, I feel like I have enough energy and rejuvenation in order to kind of pursue the things that I'm hoping to pursue. I have hope that what I pursue is going to pay off. When those things mentally are present, happiness oftentimes is also present. Does that make
Mhm.
sense?
Yeah, the way that I guess summarizes it well for me, I don't know if everybody thinks of it this way, but like what's going on for you mentally, you have a limited amount of mental capacity, mental resources. That's mental energy, that's thinking ability, that's just how much your mind can hold. And I think you're well when you feel like there's an abundance of that capacity. There's an abundance of those resources. You're less well when things like stress or big problems in your life, or I'm spread so thin, I've got to deal with and tend to so many different things. When those kinds of things are subtracting from the availability of resources or putting some type of lean on that availability, you can find yourself being closer to what looks like happiness when that mental well-being state is one that has less stress, less things pulling on the mental resources that you have. You can feel lighter, you can feel better, you can feel like mentally I am well because I'm living in a mental abundance rather than some type of mental deficit or mental debt even.
Hmm. Yeah. So I think with that kind of background on the world's happiness report, they kind of boil it down to about seven, eight different factors that seem to contribute quite a bit to the happiness of people around the world. And so I'm just going to really quickly kind of go over some of those concepts and then just make one connection, which again, I think will be kind of the bridge between social well-being and mental well-being. So some of the factors that they talk about are caring and sharing. So that's one, is that when we care for other people, it enriches the happiness of both us as the giver and the happiness of the receiver. And so oftentimes when I'm the recipient of caring or sharing, my own happiness increases as a receiver, but happiness also goes up for the giver. So caring and sharing, that's theme number one. Theme number two was trust. They actually talked about it as wallets and well-being, and they talked about how when we're generous, when we are willing to give money or financial resources or other things, that's a powerful predictor of happiness as well. When we feel like our needs are taken care of, and then we have a bit to give to take care of the well-being of other people, that increases trust. I feel like I will be secure, and they also feel like they'll be secure. So this idea of trust and wellness and wallets, sharing of resources, that's important. The third factor that they talked about is eating together, sharing meals together. They talked about how happiness is kind of maximized in cultures where people eat together. And it was interesting because one of the facts that they talked about is we know that smoking has a negative impact on someone's health and well-being. And they talked about how eating together, it is kind of as influential in a positive direction as cigarette smoking is in a negative direction. And they talked about the negative impact of eating alone is comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And so this idea of like eating together, that's something really significant that brings this idea of happiness and well-being.
So
So
you
that was
buy
number.
yourself 15 cigarettes a day if you eat with your family then. I feel like you've earned some cigarettes then.
That might bring happiness in a different way. Um, the fourth factor is household size and family bonds. And they talked about how countries or people who tend to be really happy tend to be in households around four or five people. And then that seems to be kind of a sweet spot because you can be tightly knit together. You can know each other and you can kind of really help and support one another. And so that alleviates some of that isolation, but it's not so big that it becomes overwhelming or there's too many details or people to keep track of that I can't get that close knit relationship. So household size, 4 or 5, seems to be one. Next, they talked about youth and especially social support for youth. And they talked about how when youth in a particular country can feel support, can feel kinship, can feel kindness coming from other people, that tends to contribute to the nation's overall happiness. But they talked about how there's this huge decline now where youth, especially teenagers, young adults, feel like they don't have anyone to count on. They can't turn to somebody in a time of need. And they said it's nearly 20% of youth now worldwide who say, I don't have anyone else that I can count on. But just this idea of like sending a kind message or asking about somebody's day significantly increases their happiness. And so having a social support, someone to count on, that's something really important. The sixth factor that they talked about, and I know this is a fire hose, I'm going to wrap it up real quick. The sixth factor
Great fires.
is they talked about how benevolence reduces what they call death of despair, or deaths of despair. And they talked about things like volunteering or doing charitable work, giving things charitably. It lowers the rates of what they call deaths of despair, things like suicides and overdose and substance abuse and those kinds of things. So getting outside of yourself kind of eliminates despair, which obviously is kind of the antithesis of happiness, or antithesis, I think is the way I should have said that. And so then the final factor, number seven, is politics. And again, they kind of brought in this idea of trust. Societies that are low trust tend to have low happiness. And then what happens is they see a rise in populism, whereas societies that are high in trust see happiness on the rise, and it pushes them more to the left politically, because again, that's a place where people are looking out for each other, taking care of each other, looking like providing for each other. And so they talk about how the political arena also influences happiness level. So that was seven factors. And one of the things that really stands out to me again is like how, in essence, each one of these factors is connected to how much interaction do you have with other people? Are people looking out for you? Are people providing for you? Do you eat with other people? Do you feel supported by other people? Do you live in a society where we're giving to people? And so I think there's a real direct correlation between social well-being and mental well-being. So, with that fire hose of information, what are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, what's left to be said? There's the list. Go be happy.
If
Um,
only it were that simple.
I think it's really fascinating. There's so many different layers to this. First, as you pointed out in the beginning, this isn't a directional thing. It's not do something from this list and you will be happy. It's this seems to be what's happening in places where there is a lot of happiness. And so that who knows which comes first, but we can observe that happy people seem to be doing these things. Do they do it because they're happy? Are they happy because they do it? Or, are they already happy and just happen to be doing this? There's, I think, some really complicated network of clearly pro-social behavior is an integral part of a very satisfying life. Not only, receiving social benefits from other people, being around them, receiving their trust, receiving their support, but giving it as well, being generous with other people, giving your trust to other people, giving your time and your effort to the people around you.
Mm.
And so I think what that says then is it reinforces what we were saying in some of these social conversations that we had previously, that it's a leg of your health, just like, your physical health is, and the things that you have to do to stay physically healthy. It's a necessity. It's a requirement, just like you have to eat. But I think it also says that you can invest in your mental health by paying attention to just what you do in general. What's the kind of life that you're living in general? I think it's very easy for all of us. You and I are therapists, so I've never specifically talked to you about this, but I'm sure you've experienced this, where it feels like people want a fix for their mental health. I'm depressed. I'm anxious. I'm this, and this. I'm grieving. Whatever the problem is. And they come to you as though, you're going to prescribe them a fix for whatever that thing is that they're dealing with. And, we live in a pretty transactional society, at least here in the US. But I think kind of in the general world right now, where it does feel like, if I go to you, you're the expert, you give me something that will fix this thing. And I don't think there really are fixes for a lot of these components to our well-being, our wellness, because it's how you're living that really contributes to the success you're seeing in these areas of your life. It's not because you didn't get the magic pill that's going to fix, what's wrong with you. Obviously, you should take medication if medication is being prescribed to you by your doctor. I'm not dissuading anybody from trusting in medicine. But what I'm saying is that we expect, like, if I have a problem, I could buy a thing that's going to fix that problem, or someone could just tell me, do this thing and your problem will be solved. We should think about it less transactionally than that. I'm sure there are problems that can answer to, but what you really should be looking at is the entirety of how am I living my life? Am I more isolated than I should be? Do I feel like I trust and receive the trust from other people? Am I living in a way where, I feel connected to people? I feel like there are people who depend on me and I depend on them, whose support I receive and whose support I'm happy to give to them. If you really sew a fabric of satisfaction around your life, you won't be in need of what's the fix for how I'm feeling. That's not an answer I think people want in that kind of a moment. Also not really an answer that I give because lots of speech when you're depressed or you're anxious or whatever. And this happens through the work that we just do, in our solution focused therapy. I think people start to see that a change in the entire system of that they're a part of is usually what's a part of the process of things getting better. So that was one of the big pictures that kind of stood out to me. But there's so many layers to it. I'm sure you have something else that really shines to you in that.
Yeah, one of the things that I have been kind of in the realm of mental well-being. I just look at a lot of the news and what we're hearing and like how, in essence, mental illness and mental challenges are on the rise across the board. Regularly, when people find out that I'm a therapist, people will say to me, "Oh, like I need one of those," or they'll say, "Well, you're never going to be without work." So I think it's just now like so common in our society to realize people are not mentally well. And so looking at this, one of the things that seems so prevalent in this is seems counterintuitive a bit, which is, and they used the phrase twice blessed, which I thought was an interesting thing, that when someone gives something, the giver is blessed and the receiver is blessed with happiness. And that idea of like, all I have to do in order to increase my own happiness is to give what I can to somebody else, whether that's give my time, send a message, just get outside of my own self and say, look, I'm struggling or I'm having a hard day or I'm whatever. And if the only thing I can do is to shift my attention and think of someone else, and reach out to them and show kindness to them or to share a meal with them or whatever it is, that will increase my happiness and it will increase their happiness. And it turns into this like iterative experience where then they're going to express gratitude to me, which will increase my happiness. And so I think that's one of the things that really stands out to me in all of this is perhaps the cure for all of these mental ailments that we are experiencing these days is getting outside of ourselves, decreasing the amount of time that we're isolated. The other thing that comes to my mind is now kind of in the headlines of what's happening in the world is this increase of people becoming emotionally intimate with AI.
Mhm.
And I think it speaks to like as outsiders, we can look at that and be like, that's not a real relationship. How could that possibly be giving you happiness or satisfaction or fulfillment? And we look at that and we say there's something mentally wrong with somebody who can fall in love with an AI. But when we look at this idea of like, if I can get outside of myself, if somebody or something in this case is giving me attention and caring about me and expressing interest in what I care about, that increases my happiness. And I would say what we're seeing now is potentially artificial well-being. It's literally artificial intelligence that's giving us this idea of I'm well. But when we take a step back, we say, but you're completely isolated from the real world, from the real experiences, from shared things with real individuals. And I think that idea of like, it's you can see in that instance, wellness, mental wellness may not be at its peak if my closest relationship is with an artificial intelligence. But if I could have that similar kind of experience with real people, then my wellness is going to be really high. I'm going to feel connected. I'm going to feel cared for. I'm going to feel taken care of. And so I think that came to my mind of like so much of what's happening in the world right now is isolating individuals. And so much of the cure for what they're talking about is really just getting outside of ourselves, thinking about and caring for people outside of ourselves. And then in return, we'll also be enhanced by that.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's something really powerful about the magnifying effect of getting outside of yourself, of taking something and making it about someone else or about a relationship with someone else rather than just it being for you. Yeah, there's so many examples of this. I mean, if you ask someone to change a habit of theirs, they're more likely to actually change that habit if it's affecting someone else, someone that they don't want it to affect in a negative way, or that the outcome would affect in a positive way. They're more likely to change it for that person than they are just for themselves. And I think that's one of, so many examples of how things can just become so much more magnified and so much more meaningful and likely to change when it's incorporated into this is something relational, this is something social. What I also think is being highlighted here through this list of things that happy society seem to have going for them is there's clearly some attempt at replacing the things that make us happy with some substitute that is actually harming us. And I think you highlighted that, the AI is a good example. People want connection. We can kind of sense, even on a subconscious level, that we want to feel cared for. We want to feel like there's someone there interacting with us and engaging with us. And so AI might seem like, oh, there's something I can use to replace if this is missing for me, if I'm not getting this from people in my life, or I'm too isolated, or I don't feel like, going out much. And I think there's lots of other examples too. I mean, young people in general like to play and they like to have fun. And for, a very, very long time, that meant go outside. That meant, be physically active. You're going to throw something around. You're going to go do a thing. You're going to go find some kids who are your age and you're all going to figure out, use your creativity, do some stuff. And not to sound like, like back in the day, things used to be better. But I think there's obviously lots of ways to check the box of I want to have fun or I want to interact with people my age. And they might not ever need to leave their home now. I can just play a game on my computer for 4 hours today. I can watch video of people my age doing cool stuff, and now I'm having fun. I'm feeling like I'm kind of somehow socially connecting. It's really ironic that social media, social networking is a very not social thing. If you spend all day on social media, that's probably the least social day you've had. So I think this is an attempt at people trying to replace those things. And what really showed that was when you were saying how If you have dinner with your family, that's the equivalent of increasing your health, of having a positive effect on your health, the same equivalent of impact as the negativity of smoking cigarettes. And I think people use substances like cigarettes for, same reasons. They notice I don't feel so great. I want something to give me a bit of a boost, something to make me feel better. Or, a common way people get into substances is a social thing. I want to connect with these people who are doing this, or I want people to think of me in a certain kind of a way. So I do this to try to achieve a certain image or something like that. So I feel like all of these things that are a bit detrimental to our health are replacements of the things that we actually naturally want and need. And so what we have to do is say, how can I get the thing that I need? What's a good way? Maybe not the right way, but a beneficial way, a good way to get these things that I want, these things that I actually need, that my body is craving, my mind is craving, without making some type of sacrifice, or without, putting in a fake substitute that's actually going to do me more harm in the long run.
Hmm. Yeah, the other thing that kind of came up for me, 'cause, and you kind of just highlighted in the like, that's not going to do me harm, is how many times in these themes the idea of trust came up. That I can trust other people, that I can trust the country, the politics that I'm in, that I can trust, right? So trust came up several times, and I think again when I think about that in a sense of mental well-being, trust in other people, trust in systems, right? Again, that just brings some peace, that just brings some calm, that brings like a sense of like it frees me up. If I trust, I don't need to be worried about that. I don't need to be attending to it. I don't need to be sending resources to it. It frees me up to divert my energy and attention to other things. And I think that's one of the things that I think really is valuable in well-being. It's not just surviving, but it's in thriving and flourishing. And trust kind of takes care of fundamental needs. And so when I have trust, I can then turn to interests and hobbies and spending time and enjoyment, and I think that's what contributes to a sense of well-being. And so I think in thinking about mental well-being, just this idea of like, who in my life do I have that I can trust? Who in my life do I depend on? Do I turn to? Who in my life meets some of those basic needs so that it opens up my life to be able to pursue interests and hobbies? But also in reverse, who am I allowing to put trust in me? Who do I support and who do I, help so that their level of trust goes up? And so I think this idea of trust is one that I hadn't really thought about as far as being connected to mental well-being. But the more that I think about how trust and happiness are so closely connected, it does make a lot of sense to me that I need people in my life who I trust and who can trust me in order to be able to pursue things that will increase my well-being. What do you think of that?
I think that is very true, that trust is a necessary ingredient, not just for, the sake of the quality of your relationships, but for your well-being in general. Like you said, it does free you up to now have more mental resource, more emotional resource for other things, and to just generally be less in a state of stress too. If I have very little trust and feel untrusted, that's a problematic context. That's a like, then I should be on guard. There's something bad nearby or at risk here, and now I need to be in a state of stress, be in a state of a stress response, which is going to tank your mental health. The caveat, though, that I was going to add is it makes some sense that the countries like Finland and places in that region of Europe are always at the top of the list. And this obviously isn't the one explanation, but on the topic of trust and like social cohesion, most of the people there are of the same kind of culture and values and belonging to the same group. They look similar, they act similar, they everyone's kind of mostly on board with this is who we are, this is how we live, they're not known for multiple religious groups, multiple racial groups, multiple cultural groups. There isn't this long history of this group and this group trying to, be together at the same time. That's not a political statement. That's just a objective observation. And so the outcome that, is desirable is everyone is on board. Everyone sees each other as we belong here and we're a part of this, tight-knit fabric of our society here. Obviously, it's different in lots of other countries. They have some things to overcome to get to that desirable outcome. And so I think that further supports this kind of idea of how important trust is. That places where there's fewer obstacles to getting to that seem to be happier. They seem to be, living more like the kind of life that people in general want to live.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. I think we have to be deliberate about trying to build that trust. I hope you don't mind, but I was thinking about just our own relationship and how it's kind of grown and changed over time. And recently you were in a car accident and
Mhm.
you called me.
I
And
did.
and right away my wife and I jump in the car, we come to where you are, and as we were driving there, I said, I wonder why, of all the people he could have called, why did he call me? And I think part of it was you were on the way to my house, so you probably wanted
Sure.
to let me know, like, I'm gonna be late. Um,
That's all I was going to tell you. I'm going to be like, don't worry about me.
and so, but I think that idea of like you putting trust in us at that in that moment of need and saying like I need something and I trust that you're going to take care of that need, right? And then after that, I think it was like a week, you came and stayed at our house and we tried to take care of you the best that we could. I don't know how well we did, but
Still
we
here,
tried to
right?
take care of you, right? You're alive still. And I think that like again that idea of like you giving us trust in a moment of need, it increases then our willingness and ability to say, "Hey, can we trust you in a time of need?" And this upcoming week, we're both gonna my wife and I are both gonna be out of town. And so we say to you, "Hey, will you come and stay at our house and watch our kids?" And it's this like, and you very graciously say, I will give up the peace and solitude that I usually enjoy, and I will come and to your chaos. And we can walk away with such trust because it's been built over time, right? And I think we had this friend in Chicago, and she was constantly reaching out to people. And she said to us one day, if you want somebody to be your friend, ask them to do something for you. Because as soon as you ask them to do something for you, then they'll be more likely to ask you to do something for them. And I think that that is such a fundamental principle that I think oftentimes we overlook, that we are afraid to ask or we feel like we're going to burden someone or whatever. But she really genuinely, the way that we became friends with her, she reached out to my wife and she said, look, I've got to go to this doctor's appointment. I have these two little kids. Could you just watch them for a couple of hours? And then when my wife needed something, she reached out and said, "Hey, could you watch out my kids while?" And it just grew to where the friendship was based on asking each other to fulfill needs. And
Mhm.
it just became such a rich, natural friendship. And I think as I look at this list of happiness, it is like who we reach out to and who we ask for help from. And to your point, oftentimes we turn to the people who are like us. We turn to our religious community, or we turn to our racial community, or we turn to our families who we grew up with, and we don't go much beyond that group. And I think really what we can start to do is we can start to reach out a bit farther than we would normally reach and say, hey, can you help me with this thing? And that increases the likelihood that then somebody else will reach back and say, could you help me with this thing? And so I think that oftentimes it seems counterintuitive, but we might need to ask for help first in order to increase this trust and then increase this happiness and well-being. So yeah, you just reminded me of that as you were talking.
I think that's extremely insightful, actually. And as a side note, I mean, you weren't, you were doing me a favor. This wasn't me giving you anything by asking you to help me when I'm having a car accident. And you were very helpful. It was, I clearly put my trust in the right place, which I already knew beforehand. What you're describing to me is so insightful because the culture that I grew up in, at least my mom's side, is from like, my mom grew up in like civil rights era Birmingham, like right in the midst of, what you read about in history class about civil rights America. Very, very distinct, concrete segregation in its most literal terms. There's a divide between people. People of color are over here, white people are over here. Here's how you can and can't interact in places you can and can't go. And that was very baked into the culture, even as it moved into the 21st century. And my mom is raising us. It was kind of this idea of the racial component to it. That's a whole nother thing. But in general, there's just this kind of like unspoken rules of you stick to yourself. People who are too far away from you or too unlike you, you don't put your trust in them or let them put their trust in you. It's just you leave the divides where the divides are and you stay away from the peripheries. And you most certainly don't let your problems become other people's problems. You don't ask for, other things from other people, which, in extreme times, I'm sure that is a life-saving kind of strategy. It's just to like hunker down and take care of you and yours as best you can. But to the point that you're making now, I think society as a whole grows into something better when we do exactly what you're describing, when we look as far as we can to say, is there someone way over there that I can start to connect with, that I can ask something of, and also be willing to give something to, allow them to ask something of me. And I think a lot of this can sometimes be invisible, but that is such a great way to open the door, is to say, I want to put my trust in this person. And how do I do that? I can ask them for something, to do something for me. And that can simultaneously tell them they can ask me to do something for them. Or I think even on top of that, it says, I see something valuable enough in you. I trust you. I see some capability. I'm willing to let you come into my circle and contribute in some kind of a way that only I would, expect of myself or my family or like someone, really close to me. So I am in total agreement. And I think, maybe you should start some nationwide or global wide organization that gets people to, I don't know, connect and ask small favors of each other.
I'm gonna think about how to conquer the whole world.
Yeah, go
Um,
for it.
but in the meantime, I think our own well-being can really be buttressed by simply looking around our own communities and saying, who can I put my trust in? Who can
Mhm.
I ask to trust me? And I think it serves that double purpose, obviously, of increasing trust, but also increasing connection. And though, as I look at this list that leads to happiness and mental well being, those two things seem to top the list of if I can get those two things, I'm going to be in a much better place. Anything else you want to add before we wrap it up?
I think that is plenty for one episode.
Okay. Well, hopefully that was helpful. Hopefully that increases your ideas and thoughts about how you can improve your own mental well being and simultaneously improve the mental well being of others around you. So go be well.